why are we interested in this particular experiment? In this particular one, boys are more aggressive than girls. That's just a statement. It is not a statement in truth. It is just something I want to investigate. So why does this happen? Why are boys more aggressive than girls, if this in fact is true? Well, I predict that there are some things that are involved with this aggressiveness. It could be learning, culture, high levels of testosterone. Any of those things can cause them. I can test for each one of those related to this aggressiveness. Now, if I do multiple tests, if I do a test on culture, if I do a separate one on learning, separate one on genes, brain damage, levels of testosterone, then what I've created is a meta-analysis. So it simply means that I've taken a focal point, a singular source of interest, and then I've done multiple studies about that point of interest, and then combined those. So that, again, going back to Nike shoes, it could be the materials used. It could be the cloth or not cloth. It could be whether there are strings or not, zippers or Velcro. It could be whether or not there was cushion, right? So I can look at all of those separately, but combine them, and that's all this is. And then, of course, I get a theory, and that theory is because it has been proven. Now, not proven true, but at least the hypothesis has been proven as true, false, or indifferent. So then the prediction, once I have that prediction, that these things lead to aggression, now I can figure out how to minimize that. I can't guarantee it, but that may have been one of the reasons why the drinking age is 21. So that leads to another question. At what age does your prefrontal cortex, the executive function of your frontal lobe, mature? Yes?
Around 25.
Okay. And you said 25 as well?
You,
Okay, you did? Okay. And you said
I said
25? Okay, then you are correct for men. Men's prefrontal cortex tends to mature around the age of 25. Women around the age of 23. Yeah, so around 23 when you guys are still acting crazy, that's because their brains aren't finished yet. All right, so these are the 4 things that we're trying to achieve out of that. Now, ethically, there are some things that didn't exist prior to probably the 1950s. And because I could put anyone in an experiment with no repercussions. And I didn't have to have any consideration about whether they knew what I was doing with the experiment or not. There were no legal implications to that. I could do whatever the heck I wanted. Voluntary participation now, and which means anyone who joins in an experiment has the right to withdraw from the experiment without any reason. It also applies to animals. Because animals were collected and just used and abused. And if you think about it a little bit more, if we look at pesticides, if we look at GMO, we look at additional things, there are a lot of things injected into animals under the guise of testing that end up being on your plate at night. So even though you would, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make it throw up. Right. But the idea is those two aren't separate. So experiments on animals can lead to changes chemically in human bodies, right? And so they started to put laws and regulations around how you test, where you test, what you can test on, how you isolated those tests. And then, of course, people who didn't have their own ability, so there was a mental condition and they didn't have the ability to make decisions for themselves. But a lot of people would say, well, look, they can't complain, so I'll just test them. I'll just put this drug on them. Well, all of that has changed as a result of the ethical concerns in the American Psychological Association. All right, so one of the important terms, and now this is still under basic and applied research, but one of the important terms is descriptive research. And that's because this research is observational, right? I want to write a description of the phenomena that I'm looking at or testing. Records behavior and mental processes without manipulating the variables. What happens if I manipulate the variables? I'm sorry, you're changing?
The result.
Well, you're changing the results. So I can't have statistical significance if I'm changing the conditions that are assigned to the experiment. Because now I'm manipulating them to get the result that I want, as opposed to measuring the true conditions and the true outcomes. So with this, whatever the description is, right, that hypothesis, what am I measuring? Then I want to observe those behaviors or mental processes, even if I do it through fMRI or something like that, then I want to look at the outcomes of those to see what happens. One of the ways I want to do that is through naturalistic observation. So let's say that I want to watch children during playtime at Montessori, right? Then I don't want to go in and say, oh, look, you guys are going to be out playing, but don't do anything, crazy, stupid or anything, because I'm going to be watching you. And if you do anything stupid, then you're going to be in trouble, right? I just manipulated the variables. Yes?
Is that kind of like, I forget the exact, is it the Stanford prison experiment? Is that what it was called?
Stanford prison experiment was one of those, yes.
Was that one of those situations where they were, especially the people that were posing as guards were kind of, or after they were, they felt encouraged to act particularly vicious towards the people that were...
Well, they weren't necessarily encouraged, but they felt empowered. They felt like because of that position, they had the authority to act aggressive toward others.
There was new research that came out that the person that actually did the research told them to be more aggressive.
Well, they told, I'm not discounting that, they told them to act as guards towards prisoners.
Oh, no.
But the guards went overboard with it. So,
No, but there are people who said that, like the heads of the experiment specifically told the guards you should act.
the head of the experiment is under investigation. I mean, he's done other studies the same way, and they said that, but again, guys, remember, as I said before, ethical principles did not exist in the 40s and the 50s. So there was nothing wrong with them allowing that to continue. In 2000s, they looked at it and said, yeah, that was absolutely unethical, because they took people who were powerless and allowed people who were powerful to use instruments against them. So I'm not arguing what you say. I'm saying that the difference in ethics then and ethics now make that more suspect. Okay? So yeah. All right. So naturalistic says, well, don't put conditions. If it's going to be natural, watch them in their natural environment. How do kids play? Are they aggressive? Are they non-aggressive? Do they isolate themselves? Are they extroverts? Are they introverts? Well, I just want to look at them in their natural environment. Jane Goodall, who is the forerunner in guerrilla research, spent 2 years living in the jungle with gorillas so that she could see specifically how they acted in their natural environments. And that's what this is. Now, surveys, questionnaire, polls, whatever those, P-O-L-L-S, whatever those are, it's simply, I'll never get 100% response. So since I don't get 100%, then maybe if I get a representative sample, then that will give me an idea of what the general population thinks. So that's what a survey does. And then a case study. Case study is very specific in that we're looking at a singular phenomena that we want to investigate or observe. In the other class, I talked about people with migraines. So if I wanted to understand what causes migraines, and if I know that someone gets them, then I may do a full study just on that person. Right? So that would be a case study. Or I can take a group of people with migraines and study them as well. Right? So it'll still be a case study, but I'm looking at a singular phenomena that I'm looking to research. And so I specifically study those people as opposed to the general population. Now, archival research. Descriptive research approach that studies existing data. A lot of times, archival research is used to provide additional information that was, not available, or that the research participants no longer exist. The Tuskegee experiment was one that was conducted in the South, and the CDC, Center for Disease Control, conducted an experiment. They brought in 20 to 30 African American men, and they injected them all with syphilis. And none of them knew that they were being injected with that. And so they studied them for 20 or 30 years just to see how it would degrade their thinking, their bodies, and even lead to death. Well, today, of course, they absolutely couldn't do that, but the doctors, nurses, nor the participants are alive anymore. So we can't ask them. So you go to the archives, the databases, and say, well, what was the experiment? How did they conduct it? What were the results? What were the impacts? All of those things. So that's where archival research can come into play. It's interesting, and it's not a direct correlation. But Jim Jones, if you're familiar with Jim Jones was a San Francisco pastor who started a church, and in that church there was absolute obedience to his word, to the point that if you were participating in a service and you decided to get up and leave before it was over, they had people who would make you sit back down. And when Jim Jones ultimately left the U.S., he took his church and the members to Guyana, South America. When he started losing even more than he'd already lost of mental stability, they created cyanide Kool-Aid. And they said, it's time for all of us to ascend. 70% or more of the people in that congregation willingly drank the Kool-Aid. So these type of, but now we didn't have to have all archival research because some people escaped. But for the reasons and the things behind that, for the people who chose to make those decisions to drink the Kool-Aid and commit suicide, they got around. So you have to look at data related to that particular person. That would be archival research. All right. So moving a little further. Now here is the statement to remember. Correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. All right, so correlation is simply the relationship that two or more variables have to each other. Now, because it's not causal, just because they have a relationship, it does not mean that one of them causes the other. They simply have a responsiveness that seems to occur during the same time frame. Okay? All right, so I know I'm getting some looks. So, ice cream sales, crime rate. Any relationship?
No. Yeah, when there's not enough ice cream, there's crime.
No, that would be causal. Remember, correlation is not causation.
Well, did you do a research
sorry?
study?
No. Let's hope not, where I killed a lot of people. I just got an ice cream sundae the other day. Yes, sir.
Due to the fact that there's ice cream trucks and people go to there, people are being robbed near the ice cream trucks.
Okay, you did a back door to it, but what you're saying is theoretically right? Because when do ice cream sales tend to increase?
Summer.
During the summer, right? When do people tend to congregate more?
Winter.
Summer, right? And so, if you think about it, ice cream sales means that more people are out of their house. I can break in more. More people are out and about, which means that more cell phones, laptops, wallets, jewelry, all of those things are out in crowds, which makes it easier for me to take those things. So even though ice cream sales don't cause crime rate, and crime rate doesn't cause ice cream sales, they tend to move during the same period. And so there is a relationship that exists, but is not causal. One does not cause the other. All right, that's why correlation is not causation. And so we look at the strength of those relationships to determine how much movement happens between those two variables. So the strength of a relationship, because this is still statistical, cannot exist beyond one in an upward direction, nor beyond one in a downward direction. So if I start from 0 and I look at the variables, if I have variable A and variable B, then variable A moves with respect to variable B, let's say 60% of the time. Now, because they're both going in an upward direction, this moving toward this positive number says that 60% of the time, A moves when B moves, or B moves when A. I can choose which variable I want to reference, right? But that says that the strength of that relationship here is 60%, which means, again, if A moves, then B moves 60% of the time that A moves. That's all it means. Now, that's going in an upward direction. The same thing can happen here. And it can be the same. So you can see that one has no greater value than the other, because it's simply amount of movement, upward or downward. So a negative 60 is just as much movement as a positive 60. Now, if they move in the same direction, meaning A and B are either both going up or A and B are both going down, then that is called a positive correlation. And that's why I mentioned upward or downward. Because positive does not mean always that it's going up. It only means that they are moving in the same direction, that both variables are moving in the same direction. If they're both going down, it's a positive correlation. If they're both going up, it's a positive correlation. Am I going too fast, guys, or is this at the right speed? Slow it a little bit?
Oh, no, it's good. It's just-
Okay, all right. Okay. Now, if there is an inverse relationship, meaning that as A increases, B decreases, then that is considered a negative correlation. Now, if I still wanted to use a strength relationship, how would I do that using a negative correlation? How might I do that using a negative correlation? Yes?
You mean like an example?
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
No, go ahead.
You mean like an example? Like that?
Yeah, well, you can use an example, or you can just how it would be applied. But if an example works, please go right ahead.
Okay. Never mind.
That's
Is
okay.
that like saying when there is less of A, there is more of B? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, I could do that, right? So the key there is that I have to isolate which variable is of interest, right? Because before, I said that a 0.6 meant that it was moving, they were both moving in the upward direction. One was moving 60% to the other. Well, now they aren't both moving in the same direction. So the only way I would assign a positive or negative to it is dependent on the variable of interest. If I was looking at B, since B is going downward, then this would be a negative correlation or strength factor. If I were looking at A going up, it would be a positive strength factor, right? So, but that's the way you can still measure the strength between those two variables, two or more variables. Now, both of these are time dependent. Positive and negative are time dependent. Meaning that one instance of an occurrence does not make it a relationship. Right? So you went out on one date. Doesn't mean you'll ever have another date. But if you go out for like 6 weeks, you may say, yeah, that's my girl, that's my boy, that's my partner, whatever it is, right? So over time, the more that it happens, the more likely that it will continue. And if that's the case, then I say that yes, there possibly is a relationship. However, as I said before, it may happen one time. And then after that, you don't see it again. Well, if there's no strength relationship that is associated with time, then it is a zero correlation. Zero means that they may happen. Sometimes you may see them operating together, but most of the time they are not. So it's either positive, negative, or zero. Okay? That's correlation. Any questions? Okay, you might think of them later. If you do, it's fine. All right. Now, some of the things, and we'll just talk about this one, right? They're illusory, but people who are getting married, oh yes, something blue, something borrowed, something old, something new, right? And supposedly, as a result of getting those things, your marriage will be more secure and will last longer, right? Not true. In all instances, because they're still doing blue, old blue, new, whatever else, and there are higher rates of divorce than there have ever been. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a relationship between those two things, right? But that's the idea behind that. Now, moving a little further, what is not the same, because correlation is not what?
Causation.
Is not causation. However, experiments are. Experiments are causal. The experiments want to see cause and effect. They want to know why something is happening. Correlations? Nope, because they're only relationships. But we do an experiment because we're going to set up conditions where we want to know that the outcome is going to be X. And ideally, we want the outcome to be X 90, 95, 97, 99% of the time. So it is a carefully controlled scientific procedure that involves the manipulation and control of variables to determine cause and effect. If X happens, Y is the result. What would be the explanation? What's the goal of the explanation? What would be the goal? We talked about it before. Yes?
To find out what your hypothesis is.
The hypothesis, that's correct. So I create a hypothesis, a statement of predictive truth. And then I do the experiment to see if in fact it is. And I control the variables associated with that, the conditions. So with experimental research, yes, did I say something wrong? Oh, that wasn't for me? Okay, all right, cool. All right, because I can be wrong, right? I can be wrong, right, wrong, right. Oh, you said no, not you propose. That's the right answer. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so independent variable versus dependent variable. Okay, here's the easiest way to remember that. I causes D.
Oh.
Yeah, not you, I as a pronoun. I causes D. So the independent variable is the reason that the dependent variable changes or has the possibility of change. How's your car?
That's fine.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was thinking about it, so I needed to ask. Because I have a really good mechanic.
No, it was just low on gas.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, so the independent variable is the cause, the dependent variable is the effect. Good? All right, so I'm going to give you, yeah, I know you're happy that I'm walking past you, I got you. I'm going to give you a drink, but it's going to have high levels of sugar, right? And I want to see how you behave after you drink that within the first half an hour or so, right? What's the independent variable?
Me.
The
drink?
The sugar.
Why the drink?
Is the amount of sugar you want to give me?
Okay, but why is it the independent variable?
Because that can change.
No, not that can change. I'm looking for, huh?
Because their behavior
Say
is
it.
affected by the
Because
sugar.
it's like, that's what causes anything, like,
Well, remember, think of it guys, cause and effect.
You're looking for the change in him.
Yeah.
yeah.
So the effect is what? The effect, the change in you is what is it dependent on?
How my body reacts to the sugar.
To the sugar,
Yes.
right? So the sugar is causing your body to change,
Okay.
right? So whatever is changing is dependent on what's causing it to change. So the cause is the sugar. The change is your behavior as a result of that sugar. That's how you look at it, right? So let's see, someone had their hand up. Who had their hand up when I was asking the question? Somebody over here.
I had it, but he already answered it.
No, but that's okay. I want to ask you to give me another example. Provide another example of cause and effect.
Brain is completely blank. I'll be frank.
Well, what might cause something else?